The human brain is only to a limited extent like a computer. A lot of people, especially in the computer science world, do not quite understand the nature of the brain and how the brain processes information.
Thomas Sudhof is one of the most outstanding neurobiologists of our time, a Nobel Prize laureate and a scientist who fundamentally transformed our understanding of how neurons communicate in the brain.
The imperfection of the human mind may actually also be a cause of good. It's obvious that AI in the end operates by amalgamating millions and millions of data points in the case of language that already exists. And as such, AI is always an extract.
It's only statistical, still only statistical machine. Mr. Professor, it's a great honor having you here. And my first question, what makes us human?
So what certainly doesn't make us human is being called Mr. Professor. So please call me Tom. Everybody
Tom,
does.
what makes us human?
I wish I knew. It's not a scientific question, it's a philosophical question. Clearly, even before the advent of AI, it was well recognized that the amount of knowledge, even the amount of insight, the amount of wisdom, if you want, is not a measure of humanity. In many regards, after all, I believe we are maybe sophisticated, but still animals. Animals that differ from other animals because they have capacities that other animals cannot have. And the most critical of these is language. You could argue that AI has language and therefore that doesn't really distinguish us from an AI machine that can express itself to some degree as well. Understanding why AI-generated language is different from human language is really a major challenge that is more philosophical than scientific. What to me is obvious that AI in the end operates by amalgamating, summarizing, in some way congregating even millions and millions of data points in the case of language, of spoken language or written language that already exists. And as such, AI is always an extract that reflects in some way a means, an average. Whereas a human, by his or her very nature, is a variation. You could argue then that maybe we can program AI to vary as well. I'm not sure how far that will get us. But I suspect that the nature of humanity will be best defined in the use of language.
I try to understand that difference between human understanding and artificial understanding. For example, for AI, this page, it's numbers of vectors. For our brain, it's the web of associations.
There are many differences. The most obvious one is that AI has an infinite memory. We humans have a very limited memory. Our memories are so limited that we often think we remember something which doesn't even exist. AI never makes mistakes. So when we have a piece of paper and there's something on there and we associate it with something else, that process in itself is faulty in a human, but precise when you use AI. In fact, that is probably the best use of AI now, which is to take advantage of the huge amount of data that are out there already. I would argue that, however, the faultiness, the imperfection of the human mind, our inability to remember things correctly and precisely beyond a certain point, may actually also be a cause of good, because it frees us from the constraints of memorizing too much. There are people who are born with better than usual memory capacities. They're supposed to be people, I've never met them, but when you look into the literature, they're supposed to be people who remember every hour of their lives. These people are not happy people. These people are not necessarily particularly productive, because too many facts, too much memory, too many associations can be as constraining as they can be helpful. So that is certainly one thing which is if you want, a deficit of the human mind compared to AI, which is important. Namely, that AI can basically remember anything you ever feed into the data set. A human often thinks she or he remembers something when it is purely imagined.
It's only statistical, still only statistical machine.
As a scientist, the word statistics has not always a positive ring. And I guess that's also how you mean that.
How effects look like, causality.
What effects?
When I'm doing something, I can predict the effect of that action.
As humans, we try to predict the effects of our actions. It is doable for certain actions, but sometimes, very often in fact, we also perform actions because we don't know the effects and we want to know what the effect might be. Not only in science, but also just in daily life. Clearly, having facts enables better predictions. And in engineering, which is not my area of expertise, predicting actions is the crucial basis for everything you do. AI is going to be better than that in some ways, for sure. Is it going to be better in coming up with ideas of what to probe in order to actually learn more of what to predict in future, what to try? It certainly can do that, but will it be better than humans? Will it be better than humans in generating associations that are not immediately obvious and immediately available? These kinds of questions the future will have to tell us. We act not only out of the desire to have an effect, we also act out of other motivations, including trying to understand what an effect might be of a particular action. And of course, you can program AI to do the same.
A few weeks ago, I talked to John Hopfield, this year Nobel Prize for AI development. And I asked him, do you regret something? If you could turn back time, would you do this? He regrets that till now, AI is being created separated from biology.
Interesting answer. I think a lot of people, especially in the computer science world, do not quite understand the nature of the brain and how the brain processes information. Actually, we don't understand ourselves, but we do know that it's quite different from the way how a neural network in a computer works. A lot of computer scientists I've talked to would like to use examples from neuroscience to help them improve computations. And that has been successful in many ways, I believe. But it is very, very difficult to program the activity-dependent restructuring of hardwired connections, which I suppose is the next big step in computer science, if that's doable in some way or another.
If in the future, neural network in the AI would work like a human neural network deep inside the human brain.
There's an aspect of AI that will always be better than any human network, which is the ability to retrieve vast amounts of information accurately. If AI wants to create a network that resembles the human brain, it would have to, in some ways, not only improve some performances, but also make other types of performance worse. Because the human brain, in its ability or disability to remember events precisely, to imagine events, to sort of complete experiences because the experiences are no longer remembered. That is part of how we operate. And that is not something that I believe the current AI developers are aiming to achieve.
Can knowledge be called knowledge without experience?
Of course it can be, because you learn many facts that you never experienced. The knowledge, that's a totally different subject, but knowledge comes in distinct forms in the brain. There's knowledge that we can factually recount. These are things that we don't need to have experienced, but can have experienced. For example, we can factually recount that the moon revolves around the Earth and the Earth revolves around the sun. But it's not something we experience, it's something that we are deducting, that we learn, right? On the other hand, there's knowledge that you can only acquire by experience. For example, how to ride a bicycle. You can never just learn how to ride a bicycle without actually experiencing it. It's a different type of memory, a different type of things we learn.
How can our DNA, with only about 20,000 genes, create a brain with trillions of connections?
A wonderful question that we are all incredibly interested in understanding. Because at the face of it, it's a paradox. How on earth can as few as 22,000 genes make a brain? And why on earth does a fruit fly have the same number of genes, more or less, and a worm than a human? And the outcome is so different. What we are learning more and more so over the last decades is that the genome is truly miraculous in its complexity. We don't understand the genome at this point in science. People are intensely trying to understand it, of course, because it's so critical. I'm not sure we will be able to understand it in my lifetime.
In one of your lectures, you said AI excels at patterns, but not innovation. Could understanding the brain's molecular codes lead to the truly innovative AI?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
It's something fully different?
What is happening and is promising in many ways is to better model the brain in computer science by creating plasticity in the connections in the nodes, which is what makes the brain so different from a computer. I don't know what exactly creates innovation. This remark that I made, which I still believe in, although AI since then has gotten much better at innovation, is based on the fact that all AI operates in the end on the basis of training algorithms on vast amount of data. The weak points here are, first of all, that the data need to be good. Language, for example, doesn't have the problem of quality because people may speak grammatically wrongly sometimes or mispronounce words, but in the end, with the vast amount of data available, the language is going to be easy to grasp. For facts about things, even in science, AI turns out to be quite weak because there are so many things out there in the databases that is incorrect. And the conclusions that AI generates are often not right. For example, if you ask ChatGPT a certain question, it is providing enormous degree of insight often by giving you sources and telling you what it thinks and allows you to find information faster. But quite often, I haven't quantified how often, the answers are simply wrong because it doesn't distinguish between data out there that are in the internet that are plainly wrong and those that are right. It can't judge that. And in many areas of
You mean
life,
the data that was never digitalized, right?
No, also digitalized data. There's so much. So in science, one of the biggest problems we face is not the problem that there's fraud or faking or whatever, but that there are so many apparently peer-reviewed reports in the literature that are at fault. And a scientist upon scrutiny can tell, but an AI computer cannot tell.
Do you see a possibility that AI could help scientists to find a solution for Alzheimer and other neurological diseases in the future?
Absolutely, it's essential. So let's get back to the nature of AI. The nature of AI is in some black box process that I certainly don't understand, but as far as I hear from others, even computer scientists often don't understand, to transform a huge amount of data into patterns, associations, possibly even cause-effect series. We have in science now ever more data, and not only in science. The problem with that is that without AI, we can't process them. So we're going to need AI as an intrinsic component of science, for sure. And it is already an intrinsic component. For example, image analysis, they're all done by AI these days. Okay, have to, because the data are so much, this is unbelievable. Having said this, though, there's also a potential problem there as well, and I'm not sure yet how big that problem is, because with everything we do nowadays, not only in science, but also in science, we generate more and more data. And a lot of these data are just simply superfluous and trivial and maybe even distracting. The best example for me is all this data that we are now generating in our home with all the imaging and video cameras and God knows what, and they're all processed and all kept and stored somewhere. Nobody's ever going to look at that, except if there's some crime or something like this. And so in science too, because of the enormous amount of data that can now be generated so quickly, and also because it's so easy to publish ostensibly peer-reviewed papers that are not really peer-reviewed, there's so much data out there that are not reliable that a big challenge for us already now is to understand what data we can actually rely on. In terms of our own data, which we know we can rely on, AI is going to be a centerpiece of all analysis simply because of the vast amount of data. That is it's becomes an intrinsic component of everything.
Experience changes molecular expression in the brain. Does this preserve human choice, or we are biologically determined?
So there's a third alternative.
Yeah.
Which is that in addition to biological determinants and in addition to self-generated initiative or self-generated decisions, there's also what I would call biological accidents, and obviously not only biological. These become most clearly illustrated by diseases. For example, if you look at monozygotic twins who grow up together, they have exactly the same genes, they have the same environment. Nevertheless, the incidence of schizophrenia for the second twin, if the first one suffers from the disorder, is only around 50%. This is no free will, nor is it without biological determination, but it is also not fully biologically determined. There is an element of biological accidents that scientists obviously, in the case of schizophrenia at least, don't understand. Another example is cancer. You can have a mutation that predisposes to cancer, but the chances of cancer are not 100%. It's a biological accident. So there's basically three corners to this triangle. I think the idea of biological determinism is naive, to be honest. I don't want to call anybody naive, so.
You mean the idea?
I do think, though, that there is a certain degree of biological determination of who we are, what kinds of disorders we have, what our lives is going to be like. But I also believe that the brain is designed, not only in humans, even in animals, other animals, to have a self-generating capacity of, for example, decisions. Because in the end, the free will refers to making a decision to act in a certain way. And so I don't see this as a black and white. I think that this is the result both of biological determinants, but also, in the case of behavior, in some ways of chance, and more importantly, of the ability of the brain to generate its own activity, its own decisions, its own ideas. The brain has a I don't know what to call it. It has an ability to create, without any biological determinants, its own thoughts, decisions, and ideas.
Is the brain basically a computer? Is the molecular logic there inside?
The human brain is only, to a limited extent, like a computer. there are vast differences between a computer and the human brain. I'm not a computer scientist, so my understanding of computers is very limited. Nevertheless, my impression is that a computer is basically hardwired. You can program a certain degree of plasticity, but in the end, the connections are unchanged. Only their properties can be changed to some extent. The human brain, like that of animals, is not hardwired. It is under continuous flux. It changes all the time. It's not just plasticity in terms of how an individual synaptic connection between two nerve cells operates, how it processes information. It is also that the connection itself can change. It can be eliminated, it can be newly built, it can move. All kinds of things happen in the brain. It is, in many ways, a very fluid system, or plastic, very, very different from a computer.
Thank you for your time. It was a great pleasure for me having you here.